Hello and welcome one and all to this week's segment 3, which is Behind the Mask. We're going to be looking at what makes a successful wrestling mask. We're going to be looking at the ones that are really good, the ones that are not so good. But this is a introduction for kind of a multiple part segment really, Behind the Mask. So we are going to be sitting down and interviewing a couple of the creators of these masks. So we've recently sat down with Stanley Sherman, who was the creator of the Mankind mask, so you can look for that really soon. But yeah, so this is... I'm looking forward to this one, Anthony. I am looking forward to it.
No, it should be good fun, Carl. This is pretty much an introduction to our mini-series, if you will, Behind the Mask. Now, the idea with this, I didn't really want to go into a whole best and worst. I mean, we might do that at some point, because we do like to do our 10 up, 10 down. No, 5 up, 5 down. Top 10, whatever. But this was more about, we needed to highlight some examples, because what I want to talk about is, or what we can analyze together, is what makes a good masked character. And the reason I wanted to talk about that is because some things that really work arguably shouldn't, and some of this is and hopefully like you guys will soon enough see our interview with Stanley, and some of these elements are discussed on there, but some of these things that you go in a practical sense it shouldn't work, but similarly they still became one of the most iconic characters. So there's obviously a lot more to it than just here's a mask and crack on. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to discuss, and by highlighting some specific examples of success and sadly some specific examples of failure when it comes to these characters, and maybe we can get to the bottom of what makes a good masked character.
I love it. I love it.
What does it?
It's going to be fun for all.
So, that being said, I think it's only right, and I think we've said it before, and we'll say it again, to start by, let's take a look at probably, certainly for us, certainly for the Attitude Era, one of the most iconic wrestlers, masked characters in Mankind. Now, the fascinating thing I've always found about Mankind is the fact that he is a totally different character. Like that Mick Foley's been particularly good at doing this, because he's never just been Mick Foley and Mankind. He's had like a multitude of characters, and he's good at sort of, personifying those characters in different ways, but none more so than Mankind. Mankind is a totally different animal to Mick Foley or Cactus Jack or
Dude Love, man. One. Dude Love.
Yeah. I don't know why my head went to Nutty Professor, like Buddy Love, and I'm like, no, that's not it. Anyway, so what I've always found fascinating about Mankind, especially looking back now as a grown up rather than a kid, is the fact that like you can see the sort of, what's the word? Like he's crazy, but like in such a enthralling kind of way, if that makes sense. Like he manages to put this unhinged but also comical character together at the same time. And don't be wrong, I'm sure, like, because I remember, late Attitude Era, Mankind, Socko, that kind of persona. I know that he worked on this, and I know initially he come out a lot more serious and a lot more unhinged, but this is kind of some of it. So first of all, I'd like to say that the mask itself, I think it added to that, and I know there was a lot of input, and we will talk about that specifically in the interview, like in terms of certain elements of Mick that he wanted you to be able to see his ear and stuff like that, and the mask itself in a practical sense was very workable, and it allowed him to express and convey a lot of emotion, but what is it you think that, like, do you think the longevity of Mankind and the fact that he's still so fondly looked at now, do you think some of that is down to the fact that he was able to be comical?
Absolutely.
As well?
I mean, as we spoke about with Stanley, the Mankind mask enabled Mick to just showcase such a wide range of emotions. And if you think about the first time we saw Mankind, he wasn't a comedy character. He was it was like the paranoid schizophrenic kind of guy who was in the boiler room, and he was like really unhinged, and it was kind of Hannibal Lecter-y, wasn't it? It was playing off that. You're meant to look at this character and go, fucking hell, he looks deranged, and that's what jumped out straight away with that mask. So to think how Mick's character evolved from Mankind of the crazy guy in the brown costume to Mr. Socko and a comedy character and working with The Rock and the Rock and Sock connection and all this kind of stuff with the same mask, but able to kind of portray a comedy character and a face. I just think it's a fantastic example of how the mask didn't define him; it kind of freed him to become these different characters and these different emotions. And yeah, I think it's definitely, we think, is one of the best masks in all of pro wrestling history.
I couldn't agree more. More.
Another one that I think springs to mind when you look at iconic wrestling masks, especially from around that Attitude Era, has got to be the original Kane mask. Now,
do you know what? I'm glad you mentioned this one as the next one, because this is what I find fascinating, and this is some of the reason that I think this is important that we've had this talk without doing the interviews and that, first of all, because his mask works, but for totally different reasons. It is nothing like the Mankind mask, and I think that's fascinating because it stood the test of time as well. Sorry, I just wanted to mention that quite brief because it's like, I'm glad this is the next one.
Well, that's it. And I think as well, it just had that iconic look. It was, and I know I know we spoke with Stanley about this when we were talking about masks and stuff, because he was originally approached to do the Kane mask, and one of the things that WWE were adamant on for this design was that it was to be a full face mask. So obviously we know Kane has already said he struggled to breathe in that thing, and imagine trying to wrestle in it. But the look that it had, and if you think about the whole storyline of Kane, this mystical figure, and we were like, oh, this is probably going to be something dead cheesy and crap. And if someone was to even say it to you, like, oh yeah, the Undertaker's brother is going to be a guy called Kane, he's going to be in bright red and black, thing, he's got a burnt face and he wears this mask to hide, you'd be like, oh god, this is corny as fuck. But it was brilliant, and he came out, and he was massive, he was taller than the Undertaker, and he just had this mask with just a little slit for the mouth. And it was just unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was cool as fuck. Yeah. It was just so cool. Immediately he became one of my favourite characters just for that alone. I was just, awestruck by him. I just thought it was absolutely phenomenal design of a mask. And I liked the way as well. Oh, sorry. I liked the way as well that you could, there was cutouts for the eyes, but enough to be able to see that, the face underneath was burnt or disfigured, and obviously he had the black. Maybe they shouldn't have gone with black, but it looked kind of that something wasn't pretty under there, kind of thing. So yeah, I loved it.
No, I totally agree, and I think I kind of get why they changed it. I mean, they changed it a million times, and I kind of get why they changed it up, because, like you say, in a practical sense, it was a pain, and it was a pain for Kane, because Kane couldn't breathe, as you mentioned. So, this one, arguably, I think this could have stood the test of time, this particular look, except for the fact that, in a practical sense, he had to change it up. So we ended up with the half mask. No, sorry, 3/4 mask. I've been corrected on that before. 3/4 mask, so that he could emote a bit more and talk a bit more, but even that kind of felt organic, because what I think surprisingly worked with this mask was the fact that, it's almost the opposite of Mankind. This did not allow for expression, but at the same time, that tied in so much to the character of Kane, the big red machine. It wasn't like he didn't talk initially. Paul Bearer spoke for him. Then he had that weird voice box thing, very briefly, but it wasn't about. It was about being that sort of emotionless, intimidating figure,
and I remember,
and that's why it worked so well. And then when the character changed up, that's when they changed the mask. So that kind of happened organically as well. It didn't feel like they changed it because they had to. It felt like they changed it because the character
definitely. I remember it might have been on Stone Cold's podcast, but Kane came on as a guest, and he was talking about the fact that his mask didn't allow him to emote or be expressive in any way. So that's where he started developing the head tilt and stuff like that to try and get his emotions across. And
it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's helped him. He's had to express himself in different ways, and it's almost added to the character in a sense. It's crazy. Yeah. So this is one. It's almost defying, because it works when everything about it in a practical sense makes you think it shouldn't work. But like for the short time we had it, and in the grand scheme it was a short time, I think this is the best Kane iteration of the Kane mask we've ever had. And it's a shame we can't see it again, and I get why we wouldn't. I think Glenn would sort of keel over now, to be honest. But yeah, couldn't agree more. And we are kind of doing this as a list, but there you go. Now, I think it's only fair when we're talking about masks and iconic masks especially, and this might be a little bit of a cheat because, and we'll discuss it a little bit, but the one I want to mention is sort of touching on the whole lucha libre style, and obviously for me the first sort of big name lucha in WWE. It's probably not fair like for WWE, but for me, Jordan, actually, this was like one of the, or ended up being the biggest guy when it comes to this. So this was sort of my introduction to that whole sort of, masked lucha thing. And it's Rey Mysterio. So, and I think it's maybe a little bit of a cheat, Carl. So I want to be able to talk to you about this, but at the same time, this is one instance where I don't think personally that the mask maketh the man, as it were. I think Rey Mysterio, being the sort of the flip-de-loop guy that he was at the time, as weirdly you managed to get used to it, so you kind of like take it for granted now. But like when you consider when he first debuted in WWE, and he was like some of the stuff, the high-flying stuff he was doing was absolutely amazing. And I don't really think if he'd have done that without a mask, it probably wouldn't have mattered, in all honesty. But at the same time, you got to respect the sort of the reasons he wears it, and the sort of that lucha connection. And I think it was you who educated me on this, Carl, but I'm right in saying you have to...
Yeah, so I believe it's, the kind of lucha tradition is that you don't just get a mask, you have to go through certain things to get it, or you have to, defeat certain people, or it has to be kind of handed down, or, that kind of way. So it's definitely, they take a lot of pride in their masks, and hopefully we'll be able to elaborate more as we're hoping to speak with Rey Mysterio's mask maker as well, Hayashi, on this, and find out what goes into that. But
yeah, but this is where I think it does deserve a mention in that sense, because as much as I don't think the mask defines Rey, I think it's a big part of Rey because of that whole sort of respect that they give it. Do you know what I mean? Like, because I think you touched on this when you were saying about Dominic not wearing a mask, and you think that the way they're going to go storyline wise is him ultimately earning the mask. Like, and is that like that's going to be something we get in WWE where his dad gives him the mask, or a mask sort of thing. But yeah, I think that as a whole interesting thing in itself of like, it sort of amplifies that whole that heritage and that lineage for him, because bear in mind he's Rey Mysterio Jr. His dad was a famous wrestler as well, a well-known trainer as well, actually. So it's great to sort of see that sort of connection. I think it can only help towards his sort of passion in the ring as well. So it's definitely an important one, but probably not as synonymous with the character.
Yeah, I think what was interesting about Rey's mask as well is I think it might have started with like the question mark of like because he's Mysterio, but then it evolved into this thing over time that the kind of design on it was just so synonymous with Rey, and it set him apart from like the other lucha masks, because a lot of the masks are just like little cut out for the mouth, cut out for the eyes, and a full face covering. But Rey's like with the two kind of birds or phoenixes down the side.
Well, that's the thing. They're iconic. Either side, yeah, they're on. No matter what redesign he does of his mask, what style he's had, even had Louis Vuitton one before now, but they're always there. They're iconic it's with Rey. I mean,
exactly. And like we spoke about kind of Mick Foley, his kind of mask, the Mankind mask, being able to move with the times and stuff. And if you think to Rey has done so many different tributes to different people with his ring gear. Like, he's done Daredevil stuff, he's done the Joker, he's done all these kind of crazy things, hasn't he? And he's always managed to incorporate, I mean, it's a merchandise bloody gold mine, isn't it? Because you can have every colour combination of that mask. And
yeah, that's the thing. It's fascinating, isn't it? Because it's still Rey. It's still Rey Mysterio, but you can do so much more with
it's
it.
It's like, if Kane rocked up one day and he was, had a blue mask or something, you'd be like, oh, Whereas Rey can rock up with a completely different color scheme or anything like that, and you still know it's Rey, and it still feels right because of the the timeless design of that mask piece. So definitely from a lucha standpoint, it's got to be one of the mega standouts just for how you can change the color, you can do everything, but it's still so strong.
It's you know what? Fair play to them in terms of a design sense, because it must have been so hard to find that balance of going, this is still Rey's mask. It's not just a new mask. This is Rey Mysterio, but like again, like different color scheme, redesign, whatever. But they still make it iconic to Rey. And I think, like you say, that the sort of the phoenix or the bird or whichever on either side, those sort of little touches where it's like that's Rey Mysterio. I think they're probably important in him in his ability to do that and change up his gear as much as he does.
And then probably another big one, which again might be controversial. I don't know. The Fiend. Now, we don't really get new masked characters showing up. Before the Fiend rocked up, I can't remember the last time somebody came to WWE as a masked character who didn't bring it from somewhere else. Do you know what I mean? As an original masked creation.
Yeah, this was born in the WWE.
And,
in the mind of Rey. In a swamp.
And it's just,
Sorry,
I mean, we probably not worth going into how over the top they went by having a title design with the face on it and stuff like that. But just from a mask standpoint, the first time we saw this mask, it was like something out of a horror film, wasn't it? And it was so well done that it immediately transcended Bray Wyatt's character into this completely other demonic thing. Do you know what I mean? And again, similar to the Kane one, for mask makers, it probably, and for the wrestlers wearing it, it probably isn't ideal, because I imagine it's not the easiest to fucking wear, wrestling, breathing.
Under those lights as well. Must be roasting under there.
But at the same time,
no more. I mean, not as bad as it was when he was in that match with Randy.
Burn. I am sure I did that. But no, I think just it's such a good horror style mask, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen in wrestling before, really, because it doesn't feel like a typical wrestling mask. Do you know what I mean? It is.
I know the connection's been made a million times, so apologies, but like it's nice to see like the and it's not a direct rip off, so I'm not trying to insinuate it is, but like this is more the type of thing you'd see in like comics, and I'll reference specifically like there's a particular DC comics, or a few issues anyway, where the Joker cut off his own face and then sort of wore it as a mask again after. Anyway, it's a strange story, but essentially he wears his own face as a mask, and it kind of reminds me of that a little bit. And I have no doubt that there probably has been some inspiration from the Joker in terms of the smile and that sort of thing, and the stretched sort of skin look. But and you know what? There's probably people who are like, "No, you're totally wrong. It's from this character or whatever." But it'll took inspiration from somewhere. But the interesting thing for me, and again, apologies if I'm wrong, if anyone's following like New Japan or various other indie promotions, but it's not something I've seen in wrestling before, and it's nice to see that like the inspiration's taken from other mediums, but it's something that they've achieved in the world of wrestling.
Definitely, I think you could be bob on there as well. Because if you think about Bray Wyatt, like if that was the kind of vehicle behind them coming up with this concept, it is almost like Bray Wyatt becoming a new version of himself. So if it, like ripping his face off and putting it back on to be something different. So I wasn't even aware of that. So I think if you took inspiration from that, even that fits the character. Do you know what I mean? But no, I just think this is so for something so new as well, and in a time when we've seen everything from a wrestling standpoint, like how for this to come out and be so fresh and original and unique. And I even love the way that it allows the dreads to breathe and stuff as well, and because that's like synonymous with the character. So I just and
that whole like, and it must have been deliberate on Bray's part. Maybe he never thought he was gonna pay it off, but like he described this character like years and years ago.
I think you've mentioned it before.
When he done that whole promo as when he was like the Swampy Bray, he cut this sort of, I don't know if it was a promo or a vignette of some sort, but it was it's something you can see on YouTube. But he's like in the woods and he's talking about like his childhood and about running into this creature in the woods who was carrying an alligator on his shoulder, and he was 7 foot tall and he had long dreadlocks, and basically the way he describes him is very much the Fiend. And it's fascinating that he paid that off so many years later, and it must have always been in the back of his mind, like this sort of character work that he wanted to do or that he could have gone into. And it's wonderful to see it pay off. It's not often you get a bit of freedom to be that creative in WWE, but yeah, it's a great one to see. And I'm actually genuinely worried because it's funny, like the ones we're talking about, the successful ones so far that we've mentioned, and we're talking about success at this point. Interestingly, Mankind has been, because I always think long standing is a good mark that it's a success. But if you think about it, Mankind's the only one that's like never really changed. I'm sure he's had some replacement masks, but it's never really changed in terms of design. Everyone else kind of did. Rey gets a bit of a pass because it's essentially the same mask with some different flair, let's say. But I'm genuinely worried because I think the Fiend could be iconic and could stand the test of time. But I think him going now, this is them redesigning. And I think it's not even like this is me, like spoilers. It seems fairly obvious at this point because they set him on fire. So I think he's going to come back with a different look, and I do worry for that because that was really iconic and is really iconic. So you wonder, can they achieve that again?
I am very worried. I really, really am. Because it's going to be very hard to improve upon, I think. So if they do come out with a bit, like, because he's been burnt, is it going to be like more melted or something? Is it going to be like, instead of him smiling, he's going to look like, it's like down here or something? Who knows? But yeah, I think it's going to be a shame.
Like bare face, man.
You dickhead. You're a dickhead. I love if anyone just hasn't got a clue what we're referencing. Such a British thing.
British thing. Sorry, guys.
But yeah, burnt face, man. Check it out. I mean, we could have called Randy Orton's character that, but
yeah, but he only won a match for a week.
I mean,
apparently,
it's not on this list, but it's not that it's a list, but it's not on this segment. But that was a fucking bad mask, to be fair.
That was a bad mask. I think even WWE really fucked up that week.
Yeah, so I had to throw the Fiend into the ring on that one, and there's probably a couple of other snapshot examples of good masks as well, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I would throw out, and it's not one I can talk a great deal on, but one that has always caught my eye, and I think that's a good sign because I was never a TNA guy. Never really. I know you had a stint with it. I think you went to see a few live shows as well, but I was never really a TNA guy. But a character that I knew about, and I think that's a clearly good sign, isn't it? When they're transcending the show they're on, was Joseph Park, or real name Chris Park, or the Monster Abyss, and that for me, it's such a simple, effective design, and I don't mean simple in an offensive way. It did exactly what it needed to do. Do you know what I mean? It worked in a very practical sense. It got the character just right, and that is in no small part to Chris Park as well, who he somehow mastered this duality between being Joseph Park and being Abyss. And some of the bits I've seen, some of the clips I've seen, I'm like, that is a character that worked, and probably the closest they had to a Kane or Undertaker or that sort of, what's the word? Not mystical. It's not the right word. You know what I mean? That sort of character in TNA. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Carl. I know they did like things like Willow and stuff like that, but for me, this is like long-standing for TNA Impact and iconic for them as well in terms of their masked characters. Everyone goes straight to Abyss. They know who Abyss is. We've seen him on WWE. We're not seeing Abyss on WWE, but we've seen him on WWE now. And it's hard to believe that is the same guy. That's how different his character was when he was behind that mask.
For his whole character, Abyss, it needed that mask, and that mask made the character, as you've said. So I think that is a prime example of a mask that does what it sets out to do. And another example, bringing it back to the WWE, is obviously when Hurricane came into WWE, he originally had face paint to kind of look like a mask. And then when he got over, and he did get really over, it was like, well, there's probably a bit of a cash cow in this if we started selling masks. And there was a time when the Hurricane mask was probably the top selling piece of merch in the WWE at one point. So
That's fascinating. I didn't realize that that was done as a
yeah,
merchandising opportunity.
and the reason it's on here as well is because that just it's crazy because he had obviously the stuff going on with he came in, he was a cruiserweight, he was a comedy gimmick and stuff, and then they started to get that fan reaction, and they started to give him a bit of a push and started working with the likes of The Rock and stuff. And by having the mask as well, that kind of it made it feel a bit more kind of substantial. So it wasn't just him just face painting himself. It was like, he was a superhero. He put the mask on, and it was a mask.
Yeah, I always loved that he'd done that whole news reporter thing when he went wearing the mask. That always tickled me, like proper cheesy, like Superman era kind of shit, and it was just 100% the right way.
But I think as well from a design standpoint, it was unique in the sense that there was no kind of clean lines with it. It was like, you could say it was a bit Batman, bit of a Batman ripoff, but I love the way it was kind of like, curved and jagged and stuff like that. And
do you know, I often think that like that was like a very deliberate thing of going like, this is a guy. They always made it clear that the character was a guy playing a superhero, if you know what I mean. Like they never tried to insinuate he was really a superhero. He was a guy who believed he was a superhero. So I think the fact that it was rough around the edges and the fact that it was like not homemade because you couldn't homemade it, but you know what I mean. It had that sort of feel to it. Like this is a guy who thinks he's a superhero and he's made himself a mask and he's a little bit nuts. And that was kind of like when he was, especially when he's in that sort of comedy thing with The Rock, and they had all them back and forths backstage, and that was very much how The Rock was treating him. This was when The Rock was doing his Hollywood arrogant guy thing, and he was sort of like, this guy's delusional, do you know what I mean? And I think, like you say, the design and the way he was putting the character across really sort of added to that of like, we were getting behind him even though we knew he's like, well, he's a bit nuts because he thinks he's a superhero. But yeah, everything about it worked. You forget how over he was at that point.
I know.
He worked with The Rock.
I know. It is absolutely mental. And obviously he got Molly Holly as his sidekick and stuff as well. He was... Oh,
Mighty Molly. She actually, didn't she do one of the Royal Rumbles quite, not last year but the year before? Didn't she turn up instead of being Molly? She turned up as Mighty Molly. Yeah. What a ledge. So yeah, I mean, yeah, totally agree. Hurricane is definitely up there. But again, it's funny how they've all got such different reasons for being iconic. I'm starting to think we're not going to pinpoint this girl. Another one that I probably won't talk a lot on, but I want to mention it because this is someone who, when I started watching wrestling, I actually started with WCW. And I was only a kid at the time, so I couldn't sort of tell you the exact sort of plot lines or anything. But a character that stood out for me, in a similar vein to Rey Mysterio, was Psychosis. And again, it was that sort of lucha feel to it, but just so much more menacing in a way. And I was always mesmerized by his character. And then it's a brief mention, but the only reason I want to mention it is because, like, do you remember when he came to WWE?
He was part of the Mexicools.
Yeah.
Just riding a fucking lawnmower.
I wanted Psychosis. Yeah. And he rocks up on a little John Deere fucking ride-on mower as one of the Mexicools, and I was so disappointed because I was like, this is my chance to sort of get to know that character better, that I sort of briefly remember from WCW, that stuck in my mind. And sadly, like, again, I can't say too much on his work in WCW, but for me, it's like that really stood out, and I can't believe that WWE didn't sort of they sort of made this whole. Well, the Mexicools was a total. I think we've talked about the Mexicools before now, but fucking hell.
Fucking Mexicools.
Yeah. So I wanted to give Psychosis a mention because he sticks in my mind from my early years of wrestling.
Yeah. And I think when you mentioned Psychosis, because I originally left this next and final one off the list of really good masks, but then this reminded me of it, and I just think it's a fucking fantastic mask, and it's so. I mean. So basically, it's Jushin Thunder Liger. He's just an absolute legend in Japan, and
yeah,
he I just remember the first time I saw him, and I just thought, whoa, because he had fucking horns coming out here, horns there, fangs. He started his hair coming out. I just thought it was what a spectacle of a mask it was.
Did you?
He just
You
looked.
couldn't not remember that, could you?
No, he looked the fucking shit, man. He was, and then I saw him wrestle, and I was like, holy shit, this guy is fantastic. And unfortunately, he spent most of his time in Japan, and I didn't get to see a whole hell of a lot of it. We did rock up on
We were
NXT.
fortunate. I was gonna say we were fortunate. We got a couple of WWE moments, didn't we? But
Yeah, but no, I just think as a character, to think that he was able to wrestle in that thing, with fucking horns coming out everywhere and be such a good wrestler at the same time. And I don't know, like you've got obviously other ones like Tiger Mask and stuff like that, but the Liger Mask was the one for me that was just, it was just something else. It was such a spectacle, like of a mask really, and the incorporation of the horns and like the teeth and stuff like that. It looked like the devil, and I also wanted to put it on because when I did my little foray into wrestling myself and I was trying to come up with characters and stuff, one of the characters I came up with was Voodoo, and I basically ripped off Liger, Sort and Rotten,
nice.
Except I had two horns at the top. I had the fangs, but I had a big red wig as well that was going to come out. But that's the
Nice.
character I wanted to bring into fruition, but unfortunately didn't happen. But it was based on Liger just because what a fucking fantastic mask it was. So these are examples of when it's done well.
Exactly. But what do you think it is that because they are also very different for different reasons. So what do you think is like the key element of a successful masked character?
I think there's a couple of factors to it, really. So I think it's got to. So it's going to be very polar opposite things I'm about to say, but the first time you see it, you've got to be like, whoa. But it's also got to stand the test of time. So it can't just be something like you see it and it's like, fucking hell, this is different or this is interesting. It's got to make sense, tie into the character, and make you believe why they're wearing it. Like if Kane, didn't have the backstory he did and just came in to the WWE with a mask like that, you'd be like, oh, that's a bit fucking weird. But because we knew he had a burnt face and he couldn't talk and stuff like that, and it fit him so well. And like the Mankind mask originally was a schizophrenic. He kind of did that to make him look a bit deranged, and then
and you can again, spoilers because we discuss it more in the interview, but like the mention about like you can see the inspiration there because the WWE creative at the time had like the likes of Hannibal Lecter in the mind. And as we know, and apologies because I'm spoiling something that Stanley's going to bring to the table when we speak to him, but we know that the subtlety of having the bars on the nose was due to that sort of connection to the Hannibal Lecter mask and that deranged sort of psychotic sort of element to it. So just those sort of details as well, to be fair.
Yeah, no, but for me, it's the first time you see it being like a spectacle and being like, whoa, this is interesting, but it's tying into that character to a point where you are invested in it and you understand why they are wearing that mask, not just like I'm wearing it because I want to wear a mask.
Yeah, I think for me, I would totally agree. I think that is the biggest element. Like you can make it the coolest mask in the fucking world, but if there's no reason to wear it, that negates the point, right? And we can give some good examples in a sec, but for me, like that straight away, you look at every one of the ones we talked about, like Mankind, the character met the mask. Kane, the character met the mask. Rey, the character met the mask. I know it's slightly different in that sense, but it made sense why he wore a mask. You know what I mean? Everything tied in well to the character, and I think the character is just as important as the sort of cool attire, and that's probably the biggest key element. Which brings me on to my next point, because we mentioned Kane, but I always mention Kane as a bad example as well. And I don't know how you feel about the other masks, and by all means we can talk about them, but when I say a bad example, I'm not talking about the 3/4 mask. I actually quite enjoyed that when he come back and he had that attire with the sort of, it looked like the straps, the red straps.
Yeah,
it looked a little bit
stitching,
sort of psychotic again, and he had that sort of 3/4 mask and it had those touches of red on it, and it still looked really cool. And you could see they sort of pulled away slightly from the burnt face thing. You could see he had a goatee and he wasn't sort of horrifically burnt in that sense. But he became more of a comic character, and we got things like his interaction with Booker T and the Kane and Rooney and various things like that. And I didn't mind it. And I don't know how you feel about that mask, but I didn't mind that. So when I give a bad example, I'm talking about when we had Festus impersonating the original Kane. And then for some reason, and this is where I think it falls down, Kane was like, it's my mask, and then they had a brief feud where he beat him up and took his mask back, and then started wearing a totally different mask. And he's like, I'm just wearing a mask again. And you're like, but there's no real, like, why? Because you want to. Like, we spent the story now, we've explained that you weren't even burnt, you just thought you were, or whatever they did with the whole Katie Vick shit. And, we had that whole thing of him being unmasked, and for me, I think that's the point when you go, well, I would rather they never put him in a mask again, to be honest, because I think that was the sort of the story told. You can't go, well, he's burnt again. No, it doesn't work like that. So now he's just a guy who likes to wear a mask, which I mean is fine. But and again, I'm not even that aggrieved by the red mask as much as I think the other 3/4 mask was much nicer. I am annoyed by the fucking weird random welding mask that he wore down to the ring with no explanation, that he took off and then wore the other mask anyway. I have no idea what that was about. It was just like someone's gone, that would be cool. Or someone was watching Mad Max that weekend and was like, yeah, let's do one of those. And then no reason, and we just had that for a while. And yeah, for me, that was like, and again, story's important, because the whole, like, if there was any reason behind it, I might have been able to get on board, but like, it was a poor design and poor execution. So sadly, he goes into both categories. He's an example of a bad mask and a bad character that doesn't work.
Yeah, for me, I completely agree with the boiler mask thing. Like, I don't really get where that came from or anything. It was like, I'm wearing this big mask and I'm taking it off and I'm still wearing a mask. So it was like, right. But for me,
I'm wearing a hat and underneath another hat. It's like, why?
For me, it's just it's that demon mask. I don't get it. It's not Kane. There's no backstory behind it. So I don't understand why he ever moved to it. And obviously, we knew he was bald. So why have the little fake wig thing with it as well?
Yeah, the hair again. Yeah.
I know, and I know when he did his original unmasking, he wore a wig for that. But obviously because he'd already cut his hair, so we were meant to think it always was a wig, but it wasn't. And
thing is, like, you can't make him crazy again.
No.
This is the problem. Like, and then they sort of tried to touch on almost not similar in any way, so apologies, but almost similar to the way Bray does the Fiend, and they had this dual personality where it's like we had corporate Kane, Glenn Jacobs, who was like, dealing with the bookings and being the authority figure, and then he's very much like, oh, you don't want the Demon Kane to show up, and it's like, but that doesn't work now because you're not crazy. We know you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, even that, like, I get what they were going for. Like, he's dual personality, but it didn't really work like that.
It really,
the best to come out of the new mask Kane was his work with Daniel Bryan, and that wasn't because of the mask. That was just because they were quite a good pair in comedic wise.
Yeah. For me, it's such a shame that's the way, Kane ended his career, really, because he was so good. He had all that mystique. He was a fantastic character. And, I agree with you. Even when he went to the 3/4 mask, it still made sense. It was, you could get it, you could believe it. But when he'd been unmasked and put a mask on again, that wasn't one of his originals, and it was something else with no story. And it just didn't feel like Kane. It was just, I don't know. Was not a fan.
Yeah.
Was not a fan.
Yeah.
And
this is going to be one of your favourites. This one you're going to talk about, Carl.
This next
Definitely
one.
a good example of a poor execution of a character.
This next one may shock you.
Such a good one.
Wow. Look, we love Fred. We think Fred's fantastic. He won't come on the fucking show, Fred. But, all that aside.
Gap was there. Whatever.
Look, Fred was fantastic as Tugboat. Fantastic as Typhoon. Absolutely think he's excellent. When he went to WCW, it's well known of the massive botch that happened with Shockmaster. But for me, even if that hadn't
happened... Fair play to Fred. He wears that. He wears it.
Exactly. And as we know, after that happened, they then got rid of the mask altogether and made him into some weird electrician guy that was clumsy, and that was his new gimmick. Weird, right? But whether he fell through there or not, that was never going to work because his gimmick was a stormtrooper helmet covered in glue and silver glitter, and half the glitter's all over his body
Proper
anyway.
bedazzled.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm not being funny. What was their expectations with that? There's no way he could have wrestled with it on.
No. And to be honest, I don't think it'd have been long. If let's say it had gone well and it was a success, Disney are coming knocking because it was blatantly a stormtrooper mask.
Well, exactly. I can't get over how bad this was. There's certain masks, and I mentioned when we were talking about ones that are a great example is your first impression. When you look at this, come on. You know?
But this is the thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, we always remember the botch and the fall and the mask coming off and they having to quickly put it back on and stuff. But let's be honest, if it had succeeded, you still would have been like, the fuck?
Exactly.
Like, you're totally right. And again, I struggle to see what they could have done story-wise to totally explain why he wears a glittery stormtrooper helmet. It just never made sense.
No.
At any point.
I mean,
so
it's a prime example of WCW not having a fucking clue what they were doing and throwing something together so fucking half-assed at the last minute. Because I mean, this character was going to be, you know, he was the mystery partner. He was going to go into war games, and it's like, really? You expect him like? Because what were they going to do? He was going to take the helmet off. Okay, then what was he going to be? What was the reason?
Why wear it anyway? Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, you can't get worse really than a fucking bedazzled, glittered, you know, stormtrooper helmet. Yeah.
Now, you can't get worse, Carl. But one example I want to give of pointlessness was that time CM Punk decided to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Now I know they tried to write this in a storyline where he had some sort of match with Rey and Rey cut his hair and he looked stupid, so he started wearing a mask or some bollocks like that. But at the end of the day, he was already doing the straight edge society stuff, and we already knew exactly who he was. And let's face it, he was more over as Punk. You know, they weren't going to be selling those masks, so it wasn't a merchandising thing. It was just stupid. And again, possibly poorly executed, but I'm not even, to this day, not even sure what they were going for with it. So I don't know it was poor execution. I just think it was no execution.
I mean, it even looked like a gimp mask, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, there was not even much to it design-wise, really, let's be honest.
It was
he had SCS wrote on the front, didn't he? But
yeah, it was a black, you know, leather-looking mask when he's part of some weird
zip on the mouth
society. You know, it was pointless. It was pointless. Like we've had hair versus like hair matches and stuff. We spoke about Kurt Angle in the Angle episode where you talk about him putting the wrestler mask on with the fake wig and stuff like that. It's fantastic. That's a great execution of it. You know, him having his hair cut and going, oh, I need to wear a mask now and cover all my face.
But you know what? Like, the only echo I've had of it, like possibly making sense, right, was there was a suggestion that where they were going with it was he was going to continue to feud with Rey, and they were going to do mask versus mask so that Rey could take his mask off and force them to see, force people to see who he is, and then Punk could get the upset win, and then we get an unmasked Rey, and that would be Rey not wearing a mask. You know, in WWE in future, which at least then I could have gone, okay, so it had a purpose, like they had a reason, they were going somewhere with it so that we could then have Rey not wear a mask anymore. But you know, that never happened, so I don't know. What was it? Pointless. That's what it was.
And then, I mean, obviously we had the Punk run where he had his head shaved anyway, so
yeah,
really, you need to put on a full mask because you don't want to see people, people to see you with a shaved head, and then you shave it anyway. So yeah, very silly example of a mask, I would say. But I've got one sillier, and I think
I don't know.
I think you're gonna like this one. So, Terry Funk. We love Terry Funk, but
Yeah, we do.
But what's better than Terry Funk? Terry Funk with a see-through mask on that looks like, it's someone's fucking legging or tights or something put over his face. It's completely transparent, see-through. You can see it's Terry Funk, but you go with the character Chainsaw Charlie because Texas Chainsaw Massacre was big at the time, and you've just got to ask yourself, like, what the fuck?
Well, straight away, there's a reason not to do it, because it's not a character thing. That's them trying to cash in on something that's popular in another media.
Yeah.
Straight away, like, oh, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is popular, let's go with that. But with no real effort put into the reasoning or the story, or the fact that you could tell it was Terry Funk. Which I don't know if that was maybe deliberate, or the idea was deliberate, but I don't know.
But I mean, it's see-through anyway. Like, you know, it's a very American term, I'm going to say, but it's basically like when you see those bank heist movies and you just get a pair of pantyhose and put them over their face so that you can't see who it is. Except you could see clearly that it's Terry Funk. It didn't do anything. It just basically kept his hair down. That's all it did. So it was horrendous. Like, I don't know who signed off on this. I don't know who thought it was a good idea. You've got Terry Funk, one of the biggest names in wrestling, and you give him a different gimmick of Chainsaw Charlie and don't refer to him as Terry Funk, even though you can clearly see it's Terry Funk.
Yeah. It's things like that fascinate me, because you go, well, he's already well established. So, like, you know, let's say there's no merchandise there to it, because you're not going to sell that mask, right? When it comes to advertising the card, people are going to read that and go, who the fuck's Chainsaw Charlie? So it's more of a draw putting Terry's name down.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, it felt more unnecessarily risky than anything. Surely that wasn't a good from a booking point of view. I don't know.
Baffling still to this day. But yeah,
Indeed.
He looked an absolute disgrace, and it was just a terrible idea.
Yeah. So, I mean, should we talk about just a couple of quick honourable mentions before we sum up what makes a bad mask?
Mm-hmm.
So I'll brief these ones because it's obvious why they didn't work. So my first one will be Mr. America.
Who was it who wore that again?
So, John Cena.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. We can't see him anyway. Sorry, that was a really old joke. But yeah, Hulk Hogan, for whatever reason, this is one of the odd times where I'll give them the due. They had more story than anything with this. There was a lot of story as to why he wore a mask, but it was stupid. So he was fired or suspended or whatever, and was then playing the system by being a whole new signing. And you might remember they hyped the fuck out of Mr. America joining WWE.
Yep.
And like then the big sort of debut was Hogan in a mask, but obviously done storyline wise, so it was blatantly Hogan in a mask.
Mm-hmm.
And then the frustration in the story, which is why I say this is one of the rare examples where it didn't work for me, but not for the want of trying for a story, which I think is very important to a mask. But yeah, they had a ton of story with this, with Vince McMahon sort of week by week trying to prove that it is Hogan, doing lie detector tests and all sorts. And then obviously it kind of fell flat because Hogan left anyway, so they just randomly had him take his mask off one day, and that was him, gone, done, it's over. So that was weird too. But I don't know, for me, like, this is that same thing again of like, Hogan is one of your biggest draws. As much as I may have said some unfavorable things in the past, he is one of the biggest name in wrestling. You know what I mean? So why would you bill him as anything other than Hulk Hogan? Like, and again, it was done for that whole silly story, but just the storyline, the gimmick, and the character just didn't land for me. So I think he gets a mention on the bad examples list.
Oh, definitely. And one I want to bring to the table isn't even for story purposes. So way before Just Incredible was Just Incredible, he was just awful, and he was behind a mask known as Aldo Montoya. And there was no explanation for why he's behind a mask.
The Princess Bride.
Pretty much. But there was no real kind of reason behind why he wore this mask, other than, they must have watched a couple of superhero things, or, maybe like Power Rangers or something, and was like, yeah, well, kids will like this. This was during a time when WWF had completely lost the plot. They burnt out. They had no idea what they were doing, like 96. 95, 96, whenever it was, just really, really bad. And so they were creating these new characters. You had Nitro on the other side being super real and raw with the NWO and stuff like that. And ironically, Raw was fucking anything further from that.
Raw was just simply undercooked.
Well, exactly. But yeah, so we had Aldo Montoya, who was just incredible debut, and he had this big yellow fucking mask, which effectively just looked like a big jockstrap on his head, and it didn't add anything to his character. It didn't serve any purpose, and let's just say he wasn't around for very long. But when you look at mask design and what they came up with, it was literally horrendous. It looked so poorly done. It was just a piece of material with a cutout for his hair, a cutout for his chin, eyes, ears, done. And it was probably one of the worst examples of, a mask.
I mean, it sounds like it was up there with Randy Orton's.
Orton's is better. I'll just say it now.
Nice. My next one's probably going to be a bit of a cheat, but certainly a bad example of a character and you have no idea what to do with it. So it's not just a mask, but it's the gobbledygooker, and it doesn't need much more saying about it. Like the anticipation, the build-up of what's in the egg, and then we got this. And did they know what the fuck to do with it after that? Did they fuck? This was just like the weirdest payoff to something I've ever seen, and just something that there's no way. Like, it has to go in here. I mean, technically he was wearing a mask, so I'm cheating with this one. But like, how do you pay this off? Like, this was the minute they unveiled the gobbledygooker, you know, it weren't going to go anywhere, because how could it? How could this have ever been a regular thing? So fuck it, I'm throwing him in the list. He's a good example of a bad mask and a bad character.
I mean, again, with this one, they couldn't have expected him to wrestle in it. So, no, what were they thinking? And to close it out with another one that's probably a bit of a cheat, but I wanted to mention it in similar way to Gobbledygooker. We had to talk about Manta. So this is a guy who had a full-on fucking bull head and body, basically, that he would wear down to the ring for no reason, and then he would take it off to reveal just some little bald dude, and he'd have his match and go about his life. And why? So it doesn't meet the category of it looked cool at first glance. It didn't doesn't meet the category of it making him appear better. He didn't win. Actually, to be fair, he took it off and it was even less impressive. So maybe you have that going down for it. But yeah, it's just a horrible example of terrible character design. And yeah, we've just got a guy with a fake bull head, and whoever thought that would get over? It clearly didn't. And you just got to ask yourself, what the fuck were they thinking? So that's also on the list.
Damn right. Now, guys, this isn't an exhaustive list because we didn't really want to truly do like a, these are the best and these are the worst. This was just examples of good and bad because, like we're trying to look at this whole behind the mask and understand what makes the character. Like, an element of it is the aesthetic. But as you can see, like a lot of these, I mean, the aesthetic is pretty poor generally. On the bad examples, I think the aesthetic isn't executed very well either. Some of them are like, I'm trying to look at the sort of slight list we got there and go, well, none of them are really good examples of good looking masks.
No.
But I think this just further proves the point that it's all about story. Like, it's very important to have a reason, because like, why are they, like, that's got to be the first thing. Of like, why is this guy wearing a mask? Like, that question must cross your mind straight away. So like, for prime example being the Shockmaster was like, well, why?
Yeah.
Why? Especially when they turned him into an electrician. It's like, so why did you come out with a Stormtrooper mask? But yeah, I mean, there's probably ones that we've not mentioned, and people are gonna be like, well, you should mention that today, like an iconic one and so on. But again, these are just some loose examples, let's say. But there you have it. I think it's fair to say, to execute a masked character properly, you need a really good story around that character and that reason. Like, Kane is probably one of, like, I know Mankind's probably cited as our favourite, but Kane, I think, is probably the best example of a story fitting the mask and the character.
Mm-hmm.
Everything made sense until they decided it didn't, and he was just crazy, and Katie Vick and all that stuff. Before that, scorned brother, burnt face, the whole story was there. It was awesome. Attitude Era stuff, quality.
Mm-hmm.
Unless there's anything else you want to say, Carl, I think that covers a slight intro as to what we're looking at and what we're trying to understand.
Well, that's it.
And I think it'll set us up nicely for going into our mini-series, and we're going to be talking to a few of the different mask makers, as Carl said. The first one being one Stanley Sherman, who, not just the Mankind mask, Carl, he's not just known for that, it's also Abyss as well. He created the Abyss mask.
Yeah.
So.
He also created the briefly worn Undertaker mask as well, when he
Apologies, yes.
broken or fractured his orbital bone. So we'll be talking to him about that, about the Mankind mask, Abyss, and how his whole experience with WWE and the crazy world of professional wrestling. So it is a great, we had a lot of fun. So hopefully, you'll have a lot of fun too, and hear from people a lot more educated on masks than us. But we wanted to kind of use this segment to set the scene for what it is we're trying to get across with this little mini series, and yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy the ride.
Indeed.
And
so here's some funky music.
Play that funky music, Carl.
You're watching or listening
to A to the K.
The A to the K.
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 These guys are awesome. Check it out.
Check it out. Change your life. You'll be thanking me later.